Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending where you are. Um, I'm very excited. It's August 12th, 2024, and this is beginning a series of astrological courses on psychological astrology, which is specific to how our psychological drives and motivations and how we move in the world and why. So today, the place that we're beginning is in the conscious motivations that we can find in the chart. So before I started recording, Dylan, who's in South Africa, has mentioned that he's drinking some wine, and it's very apropos for today's class, since we are going to be focusing on fire, the fire gods and planets, cusps, and signs in the chart. And wine's ruler is actually Dionysus, the god of wine, whose father is Jupiter, rules Sagittarius and one of the fire signs, and we will talk about that. So I always like to dedicate the class to an entity or a god or a totem before starting, and I was kind of on the fence as to who I was kind of going to just embrace the fire gods, but we'll make a quick shout out to Dionysus so that we can all enjoy the wine. And then Jojo made comment to a train song called Drops of Jupiter. And it's known that the nectar of the gods, what's called the Amrit, that's like the essence of life, if you will, is held in the heart. And the fire signs all rule this heart and this part of our body. So a lot of synchronistic conversation before recording. So I just want to take a moment to open up the space. Call in Aries, Zeus, Apollo, Dionysus, all of the fire gods of all of the pantheons, even though we will speak to the Greek, and that we can all gain some wisdom, some nectar of the gods for our heart to live more consciously and aware after this class. And if there isn't any clarity on something that we talk about, that clarity is brought forth, which is one of the functions of fire in the chart. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay. So let's start with our course objectives. And what we'll do is we'll do some theory. In the email that I sent out, the theory that I'm leaning into today for the psychology aspect is the self-determination theory, which has a lot to do with fire, our motivations, our autonomy, and that's what we'll be looking at today. And then I have each of your charts up, and we'll go through each of them and speak to where there's fire, where there might be some dissonance, and maybe something that isn't clear for you. And you can, of course, ask questions along the way. So today we're going to talk about the self-determination theory in psychology that really has a lot to do with personal growth, autonomy, and motivation. Also, intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Where do you grab your energy from, if you will? And we'll look at the position of the sun for that particular experience. Understanding the role of fire in the chart. And by fire, it can be the planets of Mars, the sun, and Jupiter, but also the cusps ruled by the fire signs of Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. The three fire signs and the ruling planets, as I mentioned, will cover both the signs and the planets and the relationship in the charts. And then another motivator in the chart that helps us with personal growth and moving forward, and not oftentimes is conscious until you learn more about yourself or get to a certain stage in life, is your North Node. That's sort of a nudge in that direction that we end up embracing, sometimes after some resistance. So that's not initially conscious at times, but eventually does become a focal point in the chart as we embrace growth and moving forward. So I'd like to start with the psychological framework. And this theory is known as self-determination theory, SDT. And this framework is about filling autonomy, competence, and relatedness. How we move in the world as our own entity, how we make decisions, how we make choices, our beliefs about free will, our competence, the things that we know that we're very good at, and oftentimes the things that we know we're not good at. There's this conscious idea that these are the skill sets that I'm really developed and good at versus those that need to be developed. The ones that need to be developed, and what I mentioned before about the North Node, we'll see what your sign is of your North Node, because that's an area that there's for capacity to develop competence, but you don't have it just yet. Relatedness is not only related to your own self, how you relate to yourself in the world and your view of yourself in the world and what you're here to do, perhaps fulfilling a purposeful or meaningful life, but also relationship to others. And this is directly related to motivation. People that have more fire in the chart by planet and signs, also the cusp of the chart where you have the fire cusps, and we'll look at that in each of your charts, may have in those spaces more intrinsic motivation. They don't need an outside reason. There doesn't have to be a relationship to why or who is pushing you to do this, but it's intrinsically motivated, where you motivate yourself in these areas. They may be spaces where there's incongruence or a cognitive dissonance, where perhaps that's an area of motivation that should stay related more to your internal space, but you tend to be more externally oriented. We can see this a lot in social media, right? People who share absolutely everything. That might be their certain things to be internally motivated, but they're constantly putting things outward in terms of relationship. Okay, I will. So these are some of the themes that self-determination theory in psychology relates to and overlaps with astrology in terms of the specific planets that we'll look at, Mars, the Sun, and Jupiter, and the overall fire in the chart. The fire in the chart, as well as the self-determination theory, have a lot to do with personal growth. For instance, Jupiter is a planet of personal growth. I'm going to show you the glyph and explain the symbol of that. And overall well-being. This does not mean that people that have more fire have a more optimistic life or a more positive outlook on life. That doesn't equate that way. But they may view themselves as if they have more of an overall well-being. So I took a moment, and we'll look at each of the charts, and I just kind of broke down how much fire was in the chart. And we have a good range here. Liz has 4. Jojo, your fire is limited, not in the other cusps, but in your ascendant, which I'll speak to. That has a lot to do with the North Node in terms of moving forward to become more fiery and having more purpose and meaning later on in life and as you get more autonomous. Suzanne has 2. Dylan is our outlier to one extreme, which he has 4 planets, his nodes in fire, and his ascendant. So perhaps you want to speak to, when we do your chart, your feeling of having an overall well-being, whether or not it's accurate. Remember, this is what we think of ourselves, the way we view ourselves as part of the world. Megan has 1 fire plus her ascendant, as do I. I have 1 and the ascendant. I'll have to check Haley's. Give me a second so I can see Haley's. And so Haley has 1 fire. So the extremes, if you will, might be considered none or 1, so a lower kind of fire content to a very high fire content. And remember, everything in spirituality is about moderation. It's about finding that midpoint. And there's other things in the chart that are going to balance or hyper focus or hyper emphasize how much you have. But that's sort of the overall group. We have a nice mix. The North Node, similar to the ascendant, has to do with nudges in that direction. So when I say to Jojo, her ascendant as mine, as Megan's, is in fire, there's an indication that later on in life, perhaps this personal growth or this overall well-being starts to feel that this is where she's headed. So the ascendant and the north node have a similarity to that, that it may not seem early on that we're guided in that direction, but as we get older and live more cyclically, we see that we have more autonomy or more well-being. And again, this is about the conscious place in which the person feels they occupy, not anything real. This is a perception, as is all in spirituality and psychology. So the theory, as far as the self-determination theory, as well as fire in the chart, has to do with motivation, autonomy, and personal growth. Where you have these planets, the sun, Mars, Jupiter, and the cusps of fire, ascendant is just one cusp, there are two other cusps, has to do with where you derive satisfaction for your sake. There's not necessarily something external. This is what we call intrinsic motivation. I am motivated by myself. I don't need applause and validation from the external world. This is an inner drive and passion. This is oftentimes a word we hear in couples counseling, right? We lost the passion, we lost the flame, perhaps sexuality or the sex drive has diminished. That's how this is within ourselves. We can take that from the metaphor of the couple and say, this is where we have passion. This is where we just seek for the sake of seeking. It's our own inner sort of space that we're driven by and passionate about. We don't maybe know why it's there, but it's just naturally there. So the Mars, the sun, specifically has to do with motivation. Autonomy in the chart is seen in Sun and Mars and the North Node. These are the planets that are moving us to stand alone, not in relationship to everything, even though we're always in relationship and all things are interconnected. It's a place where we stand on our own. Sometimes we might call this, especially in a less mature development, as selfish. But really, these planets help to develop self. I know myself, I have my values, I have my boundaries independent of yours because I know my place in the larger world. But when we're more immature or younger, we might consider these things to be selfish, and we develop them into more of a self and understanding our place in the world. And this also is related to personal freedom. The things that we will not give up are non-negotiables. In the interdependence of relationships, of friendships, of work, this stands by our autonomy. These are things that we will not negotiate. And then personal growth in the chart is seen through the North Node and Jupiter. They develop, they reveal areas of development and expansion. So I'll show you the glyphs in a moment so you can get associated with the image and you can understand why these things are related to which part they're related to. Any questions so far? Okay, so before we go on to cognitive dissonance, I just kind of want to recap. We view ourselves as autonomous, individual, passionate, that goes on internally, which is intrinsic motivation. This is found in the fire signs, the fire cusps, the fire houses, and specifically Mars, Sun, and Jupiter in the chart. So right when you see any of those three planets, or you see a fire, which is noted as red in the chart, you'll see that, you know that this all stands true in those places of your chart. So cognitive dissonance, or incongruence, as I like to say, location, location, location. No different as in buying a beachfront property at the right time, is the location of what things occupy your headspace. There's, I think, a Gen Z term that they say, they live rent-free in my head. Okay, what lives rent-free in your head, and what lives in your head and where that might cause conflict with your own autonomous being that you are and the outer world in your relationships, with the way that you manage money, with the way that you interact with your colleagues. So it really has to do with the houses. Location, location, location. Where do you have the fire? Where is the sun located? Jupiter, Mars. What cusps are on what houses are telling you that this is an area to be autonomous? For instance, the seventh house cusp over here, which has everything to do about the other. So how difficult it must be for somebody to have fire in an area of interdependence where the autonomy factor wants to be risen up. So that's what we're really going to focus on, is what parts work and what parts don't. The fire houses naturally are the first house, ruled by Aries, the fifth house, ruled by Leo, and the ninth house, ruled by Sagittarius. That does not mean that that's where you have fire. And so if there's an area that's supposed to be ruled by fire natally, and you have water, you can see how the water there can put out your fire. And you might question why you don't have a drive like other people you might be comparing yourself to, let's say in your profession. So really it's all about the houses and what's going on in the houses. The houses are the stages in which everything plays out. That's what's going on in our head. So the fire houses, 1, 5, and 9, naturally, but wherever you have Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, that is where you're going to have vitality, creativity, and assertiveness. So when the energies are positioned in a place where there's, let's say, water and it dampens the fire, or earth restricts the fire, you can see that there might be inner conflict that then's projected out to that area of your life to create conflict in that place or with those people. This is where we find projections and we blame others when really it's something that's going on inside. And I'll show you each in your chart. So now you've got some external demands and expectations that are expected, but your chart is telling you that's not how I vibe. That's not how I live and show up in that area. And then you can see that we can place blame or become victims or become aggressive or accusatory to other people because they're trying to say, no, this area you should be a certain way, but your chart is saying, no, I don't work that way. And a wonderful example is Mars and Pisces. Talk about extremes. Mars is the planet that rules Aries, the first sign of the zodiac, the head. Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac, the tail. Imagine having the head and the tail sign. It kind of closed circuits and you don't know how to express a very fiery, aggressive, assertive planet. And so people with Mars in Pisces might really struggle with being assertive, but they might have it in the third house, which has to do with the communication. So if you just take a glance at the chart and see Mars in the third, you go, ooh, this person be a great teacher, good communicator, but they really can't. They might be in their head knowing what to say, but they may not be able to ever get it out. And that really is one of the best examples of cognitive dissonance and how these things all work together. So the fire signs and the planets, they drive conscious motivation. They give us qualities like passion, enthusiasm, assertiveness, and desire. Usually where there is fire, we are clear. There's a clarity. There's just a real straight line. I know how to get there. Sometimes it's just innate. Sometimes it's been taught. You've observed, you've mirrored parents, teachers, colleagues, but there's a real clear understanding of how to get from where I am to where I want to go. And it's like nothing can stop you. So that sense of purpose becomes very clear. So what I mentioned before about the ascendant that JoJo has, usually this develops after some time. The other cusps might be already developed, but there are certain placements like the North Node in fire, Dylan, that you have, and the ascendant that I, Megan, and JoJo have that might show up later in life. If the rest of the chart doesn't have a lot of fire, it's very nice to know that we're soon going to get to that point of clarity and right and recognize our purpose and our meaning. So it gives us some hope for the future. And that really is the beautiful transcendent nature of fire, is that it burns away those things that were not, those victimhood patterns, those stagnant, limiting, rigid, inflexible earth ways of our being, the confusion of air, and really just gets us clear. Now, on the flip side, if you have too much fire, you might be extremely autonomous, and then it's difficult for you to be in relationship. You might be extremely clear, but it could come off as abrasive to someone who needs a little bit more softer tone. And you might just think that the world revolves around you, right? Because it's me autonomy that I maybe disregard the other. So there's always a flip to too little and too much. And the goal is to find that balance. Another thing with a lot of fire is that you could spread thin, a lot of projects because you're passionate about everything, but really what's the one that brings you back to yourself? And Dylan, you might want to speak to to some of those things too. So what are the fire signs and planets? We've got 3. Every single person, no matter where in the chart, has 3 fire signs and 3 planets. That's a given. So all of this teaching relates to everybody wherever they have it. This is the glyph of Mars. It's the circle. The circle is always completion and spirit, and it's an arrow meaning directed. Wherever you have Mars, you just naturally know how to go. You naturally know how to get there. It's like they put you in the rocket and you know exactly how to get to where you're going. It's an automatic drive. It really is the planet of autonomy because we have a clear vision. We don't know why. A lot of times we don't have explanation, or we might give credit to our upbringing or our travel, but really this is something very innate. And it has to do with assertiveness. We're so sure we know how to get there. We may not be a leader in anywhere else in our chart, but we are a leader wherever we have Mars. It is just an absolute given. This is also where we have personal agency because we just do, because we just know. And so there's confidence, there's autonomy, there's assertiveness, there's a drive, there's an energy. Here we just have a goal in that part of our chart, and we may not ever know why we're driven that way into that sector, but we just are. It's really very empowering. So the glyphs tell us a lot. Anything that has to do with the circle is wholeness, completion, spirit. And then the arrow just directs that. And that's not something you need to know, but rather you were gifted with in this chart. The second sign we all have and glyph we all have is the sun glyph. Looks like the sun, a circle with the center in the middle. And it represents the sign Leo. So you're going to have a Leo cusp and you're going to have a sun. Some people have a sun in Leo, and therefore the sun and the cusp are in the same part of the chart. You can see that that's going to be an area where they're going to have a lot of personal purpose. They're going to have a lot of perhaps identification with identity and roles and the core of who they are. And this really has to do with the person's authentic desires. So one of the first things you'll learn in astrology is what sun sign are you? That's your birthday. And what house? Why? The primary house in the entire chart that your entire life is going to sort of flow around is wherever you have the sun. That's going to be the primary place where things happen, the primary stage, as Shakespeare would say. This really speaks to your potential. So as Mars and Aries is something you just know and you're driven to, but you may not know why. The sun is about what you have a seed of that you can grow into a potential. It's not fully developed yet like the Mars. The Mars is almost like completed. And the sun is, oh, I have this already. I have little snippets of it. I have desires. Oh, I really like that person's job. Maybe I'll study it. And you have the potential to develop this part of yourself. That's one of the reasons why the most important house in the entire chart is the sun, because it always speaks to a potential that you have to become. You haven't gotten there yet, but you have the seed. Are you going to nurture it? Are you going to water it? Are you going to cultivate it? Are you going to pay attention to it? And if you do, then you have the capacity to be that the highlight of that house and that sign based on your sun sign and where the placement is. And the third one is Jupiter. This is a glyph. I'll tell you about this in a moment. And Sagittarius is the ruling sign. Anytime in any traditional spiritual tradition that you see a curvature like this speaks to your potential to grow. It's like standing at the border and saying, I don't want the cliff. I want to go beyond the cliff. You see this with the number 5, right? This circular sort of emphasis. It's not a full circle, right? The sun is a full circle, but this is almost like a curvature of I'm the circle plus. So at Mars, you have the full circle. It's something you're born with, innate. You have these skills, you don't know why. The sun is the circle that you have the capacity of being built into, right? The circle in the center, and you can grow out to complete the outer circle. Jupiter in Sagittarius tells you what you have the capacity of being even beyond that potential. If you just push yourself a little further, if you study a little bit more, if you expand your mentality, your tradition, your philosophy of life, your worldview, your perspective. So you see that there's a gradation in the chart from Aries is more like a match. I just have it. I can light it at any time. The sun is like a candle. I have to foster it. And then Jupiter is like a torch. I foster myself, but with the torch, I can go beyond and even help others and light the way for others. Do you see the gradation of how the fire grows and how the potential of the signs grow within our autonomy? And the ones that we foster and nourish and nurture can give us more insight as to where we're headed and our capacity to head. We are the ones that cut ourselves off. The chart indicates our potential growth. We just are the ones that make the personal choice, free will, as fire is about, to decide, do we want to work? Do we want to stretch ourselves like this little loop here, stretch over and do more? We get to decide that. The glyphs are very important, not only because astrology is just a symbolic language. When you look at the chart, there's no words, right? It's just these symbols. But when I teach you these symbolic representations of what they mean, it's easy for you to see like, oh, I have this skill in the second house. My Mars is in the second, very developed. But yet the one in, if you have Jupiter in the 11th, not so much. But it might be an area that's still of interest to you, but you still have to put some work there. So Jupiter has to do with higher knowledge. It does not have to be book knowledge. It could be travel, reading, lived experiences, something out of your comfort zone. And it has to do with personal growth and meaning and purpose. So we started off saluting Dionysus as the god of wine, and his father is Zeus or Jupiter. So from expansion, from growth, we can suck sort of the juice out of life, and hence the metaphor of wine and being a child of Zeus or being a child of God. This is the quintessential symbol for the word God or Dios in Spanish, is that we're a child of God because we suck the experience out of it. Wherever we have Jupiter allows us to transcend our natural limits, if you will, and go beyond and lead others. So we talked a bit about the cusp. The cusp are these lines that you'll see on your chart. Sometimes people have what are called intercepts. So you might have 4 cusps that are fire instead of the natural 3. So that poses a problem because it's robbing from another area of your life. So even though you might be very autonomous and self-expressive, what are you lacking? And then we can see the what's forcing us out of balance in those expressions. There's something in a chart, not everyone has it. Most people don't have grand trines, and sometimes they're not a fire. You might have an earth or an air one. I'm going to show you a famous person who has a grand trine so you can get the idea, and you'll see in your chart a similar image if you have one. A grand trine means that you have 3 planets. It does not have to be Sun, Leo, and Mars. Ideally, if it were Sun, Leo, and Mars, that's like, rock star qualities. But you can have 3 planets that are all in fire and they make a triangle. That means that there's a real flow of autonomy, of assertiveness in that part of your chart, a lot of passion, a lot of creativity, and people that have grand trines in any element, but especially in fire, are oftentimes considered lucky. And if you do a Google search for, famous people with grand trines, you'll see quite a bit. And I'll share one today so you have a visual of what that means. And the North Node. So even though the North Node, no matter what sign it is, has to do with conscious motivations. This is the glyph of the North Node. It looks like a horseshoe upside down. You also have opposite that in your chart, a South Node. The South Node is opposite. It looks like a cup. It's what you come in with skills. You don't have to work at them, kind of like a Mars. But the North Node says, follow me. Consciously, if you go that way, you're going to have more autonomy, more free will, get deeper into your aspirations, fulfill your goals. But it's not easy. The North Node isn't easy, kind of like Jupiter, where you have to kind of push yourself beyond limits. The North Node forces you to say, follow me, kind of like the ascendant, the cusp of the first house. So if it's in fire, a North Node in fire, you're going to be nudged throughout life to get out of your comfort zone, kind of like Jupiter, to expand your horizons and your potentials. So before we go to practice, basically self-determination theory speaks about our autonomy, our relationship in the world, but knowing that we hold a central premise of those relationships around us. And it talks about motivation, and particularly what are we intrinsically motivated by, because we just are internally, regardless of the reward externally. We'll be looking at the cusp, the fire planets of Mars, Sun, Jupiter, and the North Node as well, to identify where you have this conscious motivation in these drives. So the first thing I want you to do when I bring up your chart is to add up the fire planets. I did that for every one of you because some of you are new and some of you are a bit more established. And are they naturally driven, or do they need a push? So I'll tell you the ones that you have in fire, but when we get to your chart, I'm going to show you that your Mars might be in Pisces, and then that would need a push, because that's not in a fire sign. That's not in a place where a fire planet has a drive. Actually, the water is pulling it down. So that's what we're going to look at. We'll look at what cusps and what houses you have fire on. Do they match there? Is that where they belong? Are they at home there? And then where are the Mars, the Sun, and Jupiter in that particular order, so you could see your motivational sort of drive ascending. And are these good houses to have that, auspicious houses? Are these places where you want to push? Or are they dragging you down in the goals that you want to achieve? I have to say the chart works in unison, it works in completion and integrated. You're one whole person. But this might explain individually and as pieces why there are certain areas that struggle versus others. Even though in total you might be a very determined person or a very driven person, there might be sluggishness in certain areas, and this could explain it. And then the North Node. Are they fighting? Are you fighting your node's influence? Or do you naturally, with age, this is usually comes with age, sort of identifying, yep, that's the way I need to go in life? Any questions before we go to practice? Megan, you're smiling.
That was just like such amazing information. My notes are like filling a whole book at the moment.
I'm telling you, I could do this every single day. Like, if you guys want to meet every day at 12 o'clock, I'm here with something new to offer. No joke. Like, this class, this way, this theory. I was saying, I think before you got on, that this psychological astrology theory is to bring psychological theory in addition with astrology and mix it together so that it makes sense, right? We have a lot of knowledge on psychological applications or theories, but we don't always know how to apply it to our lives, and much less in astrology. So it's nothing new, but it's so exciting to present it in a new way. So I'm like you, I just get excited and I'm like, oh my God. So thank you for sharing the enthusiasm, fellow fire ascendant. Okay, let me just make a note so I know what I want to look at each. Drive and Mars, Sun, Jupiter, and nodes. Okay, great. So let's start. I want to start with the grand trine, just so you guys have a visual. Okay, so this person is famous. I can't remember which famous person I grabbed here, but this person is famous and they have a trine from their north node in Sag, fire, right? To their Mars in Leo, fire, and their Venus in Aries, fire. So there's going to be like almost like a touch of God, if you will, like what was it that you said? A drop of rain, a drop of Jupiter, Jojo from the song, like a drop of just good luck, fire, passion, flow, clarity, transcendence, transmutation with this person in the second house where they have Venus, in the 11th house of groups, and in the 7th house of others. So there's going to be a relationship with these three houses where the person just flows. And perhaps that's why I can't remember who it is, or let's say fame, they're an actor, their career took off, right? Because people really see that fire, that spark, or that passion in their acting, and that can explain why they took off. So a grand trine does not always have to be the sun, Mars, and Jupiter. It has to be with the fire element. So when you look at your chart, you can see if you have, and it makes a triangle. If you made a line with a ruler, you would see it makes a triangle. And you can take your personal chart and do that with 3 of earth, 3 of fire, 3 of air, 3 of water. You may not have any, but there's 4 different trines, 1 for each element. So I just wanted to give you that example. So let's start with Jojo. So Jojo, when I counted up I'm going to look at the cusps, but when I'm first going to look at the planets. You look at JoJo's planet, she doesn't have anything. Now, this is Chiron, and it is in Aries, and it is in fire. It doesn't mean that doesn't count. But for traditional astrology, we're not looking at the black moon over here, and we're not looking at Chiron over here. Depending on how you study and how you view these things, because it's not a planet, that's why I'm leaving it out, not because it does not mean anything. That's a very important placement. But for the sake of this class, we're not looking at anything other than the main traditional planets. So there isn't any of these planets that are in fire. So what would that say? Does that mean that she doesn't have any fire in the chart? Absolutely not. The ruler of her chart here is fire, is Aries. So there obviously is a drive. There's an ability to assert oneself. There could be self-criticism, right? If it's all about autonomy and my body and myself, there could be a look inward and be aggressive or assertive with self too. That's the sort of shadow side of this. But the cusp that primarily speaks here is the ascendant. So the ascendant is the first house cusp. Wherever we have the number 1, that's the first house cusp. This is Aries. She has it on the 4th house cusp. And Sagittarius, Aries, where's Leo? Here it is. Okay, and now look at, she doesn't have a cusp. It's the cusp, the 8th house cusp right here is Leo. So your 3 houses of fire, Jojo, are the 1st, the 4th, and the 8th. 1, 4, and 8. Those are going to be the areas where the fire naturally kind of has a buildup. The 1st house especially. So you can be very ambitious and driven with this Mars in the 1st, but perhaps it's only with you. You don't know how to maybe assert that onto other people. And that's part of what life is going to invite you to learn and do. Because the ascendant is in fire, if you have an ascendant in fire, I do, Megan, Jojo, I don't remember, Dylan, I believe you do. that means that later on in life, that's going to open up for you. It's ruled by Jupiter. So that's when you're going to see that your horizons go beyond. You extend yourself perhaps beyond for others. And that comes usually later on in life with the ascendant. The ascendant is always something that we aim for later. So that would be one of the primary things. For Jojo, you have Mars in the first. So you just have a natural, perhaps, ability for yourself, for your own body. It's in Capricorn, so it might be an ambitious for self, your own personal growth. But where's her sun? Her sun's in the 10th house. The sun is in the 10th, which is a professional ambition as well. And it's in air, so it's a nice complement. And then we have Jupiter. Jupiter's in the 9th. This is a great placement. Jupiter loves, this is its natural placement as the 9th house for spiritual ambition too. So really, I think as you become more personally ambitious, professionally ambitious, and spiritually ambitious, talk about mind, body, spirit, right? That's when that whole thing kind of pushes you with this ascendant to go seeking the teacher, to become the teacher. Instead of seeking others to teach, you become the teacher others seek. That's the flow here. And then lastly is your North Node. The North Node is in Pisces in the 2nd house. This might seem like a silly question and you're a little bit older, so the answer now might be yes, but did you struggle with knowing your values, knowing yourself versus knowing others when you were younger?
I think I did, because I lost my dad when I was 14, and I was everything that I thought was true back then in that time period. Some things unfolded. And I was in a private girls' school, and then we didn't have any money. And so, like, I have never felt like I actually fit where I am. I could be anywhere, but I have never really felt like I fit.
Interesting. This is the Black Moon. The Black Moon in the house of others is definitely like feeling like the oddball. But the reason I ask about the values, and you mentioned money, values and money in the physical world has a lot to do with our spiritual values of how we see ourselves in the larger whole. The moon in the 2nd that has to do with values is a thing that changes daily. So who am I is going to depend on who I'm with, maybe. But she has two very congruent placements. Her North Node is right at the edge, right at the cusp of the 2nd house. By the end of your life, you are so clear as to who you are, what you're here to do, the interdependence of everyone around you, and what you came to teach. That is a given with this chart. So even though this bopping around of who am I don't fit, this worldview shattered at a very young age, it's all to bring you to this North Node in Pisces, which everything fits, even me. And I know now exactly how I fit. And because I now know that, I will teach that to others. So that's a really beautiful sort of, a stamp of confirmation on that. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Suzanne. Okay. So Suzanne has 2 planets in fire. Okay, so she's got the Black Moon in Leo. We're not counting the Black Moon. Remember, only looking at the traditional planets. So we've got Jupiter in Leo, nice natural placement of a fire sign, and Neptune in Sagittarius in a fire sign. So there's 2, which is a nice amount of fire. The interesting thing here is that both Jupiter and Neptune are in water houses. The 4th house is a water house, and the 8th house is a water house. So the little fire that there is dampened, is put out. What this can cause a person to do, remember, this is all about autonomy. This is all about self-identity. Is maybe I see myself, maybe I know my worth, maybe I know my passions. But if they're water and subconscious houses, maybe I keep them to myself. Maybe I retreat with that fire and I don't share that, and I keep it here. I keep it very close to my chest. Fire rules the heart primarily. So think of that, the courage of the heart, the vulnerability of the heart. And if this is water and subconscious hidden houses, it could be that, you know what, I don't want to get out there too much. I know myself, but I might keep myself close knit to people that I know, or people that that understand me. So that could be a challenge of two fire signs in water houses. So like JoJo, there's Mars in the first. So there is, the first house has to do with our personality and the mask and the persona that we wear, but it also has to do with our physical body. And if Mars is a place of passion, if Mars is a place of expression, what can happen? There can be a lot of emphasis on the physical body. And just by virtue, Suzanne's job is as a therapist. She works in the body. So she must have a very natural, remember, Mars is something you just naturally have and know, of her own body wisdom, that then she becomes the teacher to espouse that teaching, because she learned it in herself, similar to JoJo, but in a different way. Hers is in Taurus, which rules the body as well. But there's a natural wisdom wherever there's Mars. We're already kind of completed there. And that is a way to kind of go forward. The cusps are, okay, so you see this Aries has no cusp. So this is what's called as an intercept. I want to show you a different image so that you can see it easier, what I mean by no cusp. There's no cusp. Here's Pisces. Aries is stuck, and Taurus. So what happens is that there has to be a fight to push out that Aries. And even though the Mars is very well placed and understood, there's still something that in the autonomy, in the will of the person, in that sort of passion, desire is stuck, and it's in the 12th house. So it's something, again, suppressed like the 4th and the 8th that needs to be fought with. I believe the North Node here is going to be the saving grace, which is in Virgo. We'll talk about that in a second because it's in a fire house. So the Aries cusp is non-existent. The Leo cusp is on the 5th, and the Sagittarius cusp is on the 8th. The 5th house is one of the biggest assets of this chart. When you have fire on the 5th house is the house of autonomy. It's the natural ruler of the sun. So when you have fire, especially Leo, the natural sign of the sun, in the 5th house and a North Node, there's no way that this person will not later on understand her place in the world, have her own autonomy, because the fire here is implementing exactly what needs to happen. The fire is saying, go forth, be autonomous, know yourself. This is also a house of the soul. This is a person that with age is going to understand her Christ consciousness, her nodes in Virgo. That's the Christ consciousness, and going to learn to develop that Christ consciousness so that the soul leads versus the persona. That's a beautiful placement. And then Sagittarius, we talked about, it's the 8th house. I'll just make a note, shout out to my girlfriend here. The 8th house cusp in fire has to do with a very passionate sex drive or a passionate sex life. So have your fantasy, my friend, with your Neptune and your fiery 8th house cusp. I think she might have left already, so. Liz, okay, Liz has quite a bit in fire, 4. So she's got Neptune, she's got Mercury, she's got Jupiter, and she's got Venus. This is Vulcan, that doesn't count. So there's 4 overall. That's going to be a very fiery chart. It's juxtaposed here with all this earth. So if handled correctly, there's a nice container with the Virgo, with all that earth, that the fire really gets to grow very, very strong if nurtured, right? It's in the 9th house. This person's, here's Jupiter again, like JoJo. Jupiter belongs in the 9th. That's its natural placement. It's the teacher, it's the traveler, it's the spiritual seeker. it's later on the spiritual teacher of the teachings that they've learned. She also has her sun in there. So even though the sun is in Virgo, it has a flare of Sagittarius. So you can even count that, even though it's not a full fire sign, it's a fire placement. So that even gives that a lot of fire. So her natural tendency here is Mars in Cancer. I had talked about Mars in Pisces before. Mars in Cancer is similar. That even though this is a natural placement of an us, of a we, of a team, of a collective, there might be a tendency to be passive aggressive in Cancer, to not be that assertive. It's in a water house, so it might drown, bloop, 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 muffled, stamina forward. Someone that has a Mars in the 8th, especially in Cancer, really benefits with collabs, a collaborative effort, whether with a family member, mother, sister, women, it's Cancer, or a lover, it's a sexual house, or just somebody that can like split the expenses, right? Share the taxes. That's a house of taxes. What I see primarily in this chart, starting here in Aries, if we're looking at almost like a story, is this person dies at midlife to an old way of being. This is the house of death. What I know myself to be, my autonomy, my belief of who I am, that's Mars, that's Aries, dies so that this person can emerge. The teacher, the seeker, the wise person, the lover. Then that sun feels like, wow, I've arrived. But there's something here that needs to kind of end so that this whole thing can kind of kick in. And that's part of what I think that this, it's like a completion. The 8th house is like a completion house where we come together. Once I'm complete, I can die to that old person and start a whole new cycle. This is a really beautiful 9th house. And then Neptune is in Sagittarius in the 1st. Neptune in the 1st gives a little muffled self-perception. So that can be a bit confusing. If this is this planet of I am, of my autonomy, and it's muffled in water, in a water house, and here I have a not sure who I am, question mark, Neptune in the 1st gives some confusion. It's still in fire, which is a great sort of momentum forward. The emphasis here really is going to be all this fire here in the 9th. Teaching, studying, traveling, experiencing, growing the horizons, figuring out different perceptions of how to live in a world that might confuse me so that I can learn more about my identity and teach others how to achieve theirs. The cusp is Aries in the 5th, great placement. Again, the 5th has to do with the soul, with autonomy, ruled by a fire sign is an excellent way to go. And the 2nd house cusp in Sagittarius is fire. It might take a bit because remember, Sagittarius is Jupiter. It's I understand myself and I go a little further. This person might stretch themselves financially, 2nd house. They might associate my money is my worth. I'm valued when I have more money. Sagittarius is a more sign, but it's not true. It's about letting others give. True story. A few years back, a girlfriend of mine and I we held an astrology retreat, and one of the girls that was going to come didn't have any money. And I looked at her chart. I said, don't worry, you have a Sagittarius in your 2nd. Someone's going to offer you money to go. And indeed, one of her friends wanted to go, but wanted to share a room, and the room that shared was less expensive. And she paid for her to go, and then later on, she paid her back. So this is an opportunity to not be, and I have a lot, I am worthy, but rather let others help me have a lot. And that is the teaching here, which then becomes the teaching of this sun in the 9th, which I have to learn to be the teacher. Therefore, I have to open up to all possibilities. Dylan. Dylan is our star fire, wine drinking Dionysus. He's got 4 planets in fire, a node, and an ascendant. I mean, the chart is literally like It's all about you and we're just living in your world kind of thing. So you've got Mars next to your North Node in the first. So if the first is I am, it's the natural placement of Aries, the natural placement of Mars, and the natural placement of the ascendant, there's something here that says, where is your place? What's your natural place? Find your place within you. And when you feel comfortable within you, it doesn't matter where you go in the world. Because here's the ninth house. The ninth house is exploring the entire world, seeing every nook and cranny of anything possible. But no matter where you go in the world, you're not going to find you. You're where's Waldo. As soon as you find Dylan, every place you go is you. But that's really the indicator of the chart. This is phenomenal, right? I'm going, this is my job, and then you have Wheel of Fortune in there to boot. It's all about finding me. Where's the autonomy? Not by address, but by these coordinates right here. And wherever this goes, I am there. But there's a conflict, if you will, with all this Aquarius, like if it's somewhere else, all this ninth is if it's somewhere else that's going to find the answers when you are the torchbearer, if you will. You already have all the answers and you're just going to other places to say, I'm here. So there's some of that going on. Your cusps are the ascendant. So of course, that moving forward as you go later in life and getting more comfortable with this identity or your self-identity. You have where's Leo? Oh, the fifth house cusp in Leo. This is great. This is the natural placement of the sun. And even though the sun's not in there, it's a place of a soul-driven life. Once you figure out your identity, where you are, that no matter where you go, there you are, the soul starts to say, oh, we know our place. It doesn't matter what nationality, it doesn't matter what country, it doesn't matter what we're eating. We are us, unified at all times. And then the ninth house cusp is in Sagittarius. The way that you give back, if you will, the way that you extend yourself is by learning about varying worldviews, traveling the world, learning about how other people live. Because if you want to have a very complete I am, you have to know everybody else's version of how they are, so that yours fits within the big context of it, but you don't have to change for everybody's worldview. You just have to say, oh, that's the way you do it. I do it this way, but they're both viable. So that's a really a great place. You have a 10th house sun, and fire signs love to be in air signs, so there's a congruity there. Your Mars is in a fire house. The Jupiter is it's not that it's a problem, but just the placement. It's in a water sign in a water house, but Jupiter itself doesn't necessarily want to be trapped to the bottom of the ocean. But this confirms this. Jupiter says expand your knowing of the interconnectedness of everything. Expand your knowing of how you and everything is one. That's going to support this, the ascendant in the North Node of saying, I am, even though I'm anywhere in the world, I am still me, but we're all one. Make sense? Questions?
No, it makes a lot of sense, everything you're saying, like, and you can probably hear it as well. But yeah, no.
Yeah, it makes sense. And the interesting thing about astrology is that you can hear it in all these different ways, right? So no matter what we look at, we're still getting the same message. Like, oh my God, I got that 10 other ways in the other readings. It doesn't matter the focal point. You're one whole person. So Megan, you have one fire and the ascendant. You have Venus in Sagittarius in the 4th, and your ascendant right there by a minute or so is in Leo. Okay, so the first thing we want to see is this Venus in the 4th. This is the family home. This is your childhood home, but it's also your inner space. There's a place of beauty, there's a place of contentment, there's a place of pleasure, maybe there's a place of very strong desires to know yourself, right? Sagittarius is the sign of Jupiter. So you want to not only know you, but beyond. You want to know yourself, your autonomy, your persona, your shadows. You want to know all of it and more. So there's going to be a constant drive for knowing more and more and more about self. And then look at the fifth house. If the fifth house, first of all, Mars is ruling that right there. If the fifth house has to do with the soul, it has to do with my movement in the world, soul driven, heart driven. It's driven here by Mars next to the North Node. That's what's ruling you, right? You start here with, I want to know myself and more. And it's like a never ending journey. You're just continuing and continuing and continuing. Now, what all of this can do is make you a bit isolated. Not that you don't like people, but it can be so much about yourself, right? Of course, you need others perhaps to relate and mirror, but really it's like, oh, that for me, ooh, that for me, ooh, that for me, right? That can become very isolating. And the reason I say that is because of your ascendant. The ascendant in Leo, notoriously people with ascendants in Leo don't like a lot of people around them, in part because all that self-discovery, you might be afraid that they figure out something about you before you figure it out. So it's almost like a hunger, like the hungry caterpillar. Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? What makes me tick? I need to know. I need to know. Oh my God, me. So that someone doesn't come and say, oh, I know that about you, because the Leo ascendant is the sun. Can someone know more about the sun than the sun itself? No. And what you're trying to do is get there faster, if you will. Hence Mars conjunct North Node. Take me faster. So I can collect all this information about myself so that I am the expert on me. That's one of the big things. We saw your one planet, your ascendant, your Mars next to North Node. This is great because regardless of what you do, there's always going to be a self-exploration desire, and you're always going to be nudged in that direction. And maybe because you have all of this Capricorn and your sun is in Capricorn in a house of Earth, so it has a good grounded placement. The only thing that this might become difficult in the nudge, remember the North Node, there's a little resistance, is that the chart is asking you to let go of perhaps labels or limitations that you yourself self-impose, and be more open to being like the sun, that you have the possibility of being everything. So if you find yourself saying never, always, not me, them versus me, pay attention to that, because that's not sun language, that's Capricorn language. And the North Node wants you to kind of get rid of some of those labels so that you have a clearer holistic view of yourself, so that you can really fall into that Leo ascendant.
Yeah, that's very like interesting that you say that, because I felt like over the years, whenever I have been like attached to a thought about myself, like situations will arise where it will like literally prove that wrong. Like I'm someone who goes to bed early and has to go to bed early, like in a job in Vietnam where I have to work till 11 p.m. And then I realize, oh, I can. So
because your your Mars is what you know yourself to be. I am, and then you have the future right next to it. So whatever you think you are, the future is right there to say, nope, I am, nope, I am, nope. And that fifth house that's packed is ruled by Leo and the sun. And here it is. You want to really become the ascendant. The ascendant is the answer to our lifetime. You want to become that all-encompassing sun that shines on everyone, that rises for everyone. Then you have to learn everything that you think you are and look at something different and look at something different and look at something different. And Haley. So Haley, we saw previously, Haley has one fire. It's a Mercury in Leo, and her ascendant is Cancer. Okay. So her sun and her Jupiter are in the 12th, and her Mars is in the 10th. So the sun and Jupiter, being fire planets, don't like being in water houses, similar to yours, Dylan. So the invitation, because it's in a water house, is the sun and the Jupiter are, how can I know myself as part of a collective. That's a very difficult placement for the sun. The sun wants to be shining in the sky. It does not want to be, at the bottom of the ocean and only finding out, with me and the fish who I am. So there's a difficulty, a cognitive dissonance of how do I shine? And then here's the Jupiter. How not only do I shine, but how do I go above and beyond that to shine on others when I'm stuck at the bottom of the ocean? So part of this, because of all this water and all this Cancer, is doing this, and I'm speaking this because Mars is in the 10th, which is the house of profession, is finding a profession that supports interconnectedness, spiritual philosophy, those are words for the 12th, perhaps depression, mental illness, anything that has to do with dreams. That would be one of the primary ways in order for this person to really develop this conjunction of Mars, Jupiter, which in itself is a beautiful conjunction. That's someone who kind of has like a natural angel on their shoulder. But to support the Mars, which is what I already am, 10th house professional. Bring your professional strengths, which are already naturally there in Mars and Taurus in the 10th, and have the Sun and the Jupiter support that so that they work in unison. Have a professional identity that serves 12th house populations. Like I said, dreams, depression, mental illness, psychiatric facilities, things like that. That's a real way to kind of understand and give back. This can also be past lives, constellations, things like, and I know Haley's very into all of these sort of traditions. So these are some of the generational, in the 12th house, we're looking at generations. So finding things that has to do with family, all this is Cancer family. This Mercury in Leo is a wonderful placement. I personally wouldn't say that Mercury is a planet of only conscious motivation. That's why I did not include it in the lecture. But it can be if the person has clarity. And with a Mercury in Leo, there can be a lot of clarity because it's a fire sign. With all this water, this fire sign is absolutely necessary. This is a person, for instance, all of those professions that can be tackled, can teach or be a therapist or a counselor, or someone that speaks to or writes or communicates what the other people that are having sort of clouded visions of self, that sort of muddiness that they have within. With this Mercury in Leo in the first house, my identity being a communicator of Leo that's clear and straight to the point. And from all of this nonsense in the 12th, you can emerge something better. Remember the potential. This is a fascinating placement to use a professional pursuits to do things in areas that don't make sense, like mental health, and really be effective at it. Because the one placement of fire is Mercury, which is the communicator. So Mercury cannot necessarily be a conscious motivating planet all the time. For instance, I have it in water. There's going to be some lack of clarity, but in a fire sign, it absolutely is. And this is a gift she comes from the past because it's in the South Node. So these are gifts that she naturally has to effectively communicate, perhaps translate mental health issues or confusing emotions to people that don't know how to articulate it from themselves. And then her North Node is in Aquarius in the 7th. This is an air house. The 7th house is an air house, and the North Node is in an air sign. However, the 7th house has to do with one-on-one, and Aquarius has to do with the collective, the humanity. So if she uses this Mercury in Leo to help people understand and communicate their potential that they themselves don't even know, and be the teacher of that and use that as a profession, she can really serve in her future, not only to one-on-one close friends, but really to a larger group of people that are much needed with all of this stuck at the bottom of the 12th house. So there's a lot of potential here for like spiritual teaching, mental health counseling, things like that. At one time, I know she was going to go to school to become a social worker. I don't know if she abandoned that specific pursuit, but anything in that realm with this chart is phenomenal. Any questions? I think we've covered everybody. Any questions about what we covered? The theory, the planet placements, motivations, etc.
Can I ask a question
Of course.
about my ascendant again? I feel it's really weird when you kind of look at everybody's picture. I feel like all my chart's empty compared to everybody else's. What's that
So
mean?
nothing's empty. Every house has something in it and a lot in it. We're kind of giving it that overall glance. As we get more specific into the little lines and the signs and the decanats, it starts to unfold more. But the areas that are more populated, to answer your question, are going to be, remember how I said that we take up, location, those houses where you have that cluster of planets, that's going to be most of the conscious motivations in those areas of your life. That does not mean that there aren't others, but that's going to be primary at first, right? That might be the focal point, especially for the first half of life. And it may be until the end, right? But at least for the first half of life, before the ascendant kind of kicks in to look at a broader perspective, those are going to be the areas where you're most going to be emphasizing your energy and putting your most motivations towards.
So is my ascendant Sagittarius?
Yes.
Okay.
So is mine. Yeah. And we can do a whole class on just the ascendant and what that represents, especially from it has to do with what happened in the 12th house is what you're going to become. So there's a whole dynamic. Everything here is relational. So we're taking a piece and we're trying to extrapolate to a larger meaning of your whole life. But just for today, right, the ascendant is the answer. That's where you're headed. That's what you're here to kind of see big picture.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I have a question. So you talked about like the fire houses as they're naturally positioned. So the first, the fifth, and ninth, and how, so in my fifth house, I have a lot of earth, and earth constricts fire. Would you say, how would that like impact? Because it sounded like there was a lot of good things happening with Mars and the
There
North
is,
Node.
but you just said it. Earth constricts fire. So everything is a light and a shadow. The
Yes.
light of constricting fire is that and maybe not as a Capricorn, but logically that the world does not revolve around you. I mean, that's why you married your husband, whose the world revolves around him right now. I'm kidding. So that's one. That's where the earth limits the fire, and that's a positive. You have a sort of self-knowledge that everything's not about you. However, on the flip is what we said with the Mars North Node. Anytime you put your own constriction on yourself, something comes to say, no, look at that differently. So it's working in your favor in both ways. But that's a really good question. Whatever you have in the first, fifth, and ninth house in terms of element, that element is going to work, let's say, against your fire, right? What you just said, earth constricts fire. And then see how that is supporting you in your goals versus how is that holding you back. Great question. Anything else? Okay. We'll close up. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The fire gods, Aries, Apollo, Jupiter, Dionysus, all of you coming here today to expand your motivations and knowing yourself a little better and the opportunity to teach. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, guys. I will send you the recording and the slides, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you
you.
so much.
Thank you, Francis.